last 3 to 5 years, and ways in which that might or might not have been impacted by space and space constraints. So Jody Specht has been putting together some stuff for that. Then a discussion and potential vote on the interim report. And I don't think I fully completed the draft needs summary. I think I talked through most of it, but may have not gotten entirely through it, so I want to leave some time to review any pieces of that that people wanted reviewed. And not on the agenda, but I think it would be beneficial also to get some guidance from all of you as to questions, outstanding questions that you still have, around which you'd like information or data, so that on my end I can be working to try to collect information and kind of plan that out. We're heading into a pretty busy season, so as much forewarning as I can have as possible to know to bring stuff to you. That'll help me in turning that around.
This is the season in part where you begin to really getting a schedule together for next year.
Correct. So freshmen started registering for classes on Monday, sophomores on Tuesday, juniors on Wednesday. 8th graders will be registering for courses the last week of March. I think it's like starts the week of March 23rd. And then we'll start doing course enrollment projections. In other words, how many kids have signed up for different courses starting the beginning of April. That then leads into conversations with department heads about how many sections of each course do you want to offer, what can we offer, what can't we offer, and decisions about who's going to be teaching what. And then we start building the schedule late April, early May, and that has multiple weeks of try to do it doesn't work, going back, fiddling, figuring stuff out, entering data, re-entering data, until we get to a relatively clean build. You load kids into the build, and then guidance starts playing with that and starts doing a lot of hand switching of students, sometimes hand switching of classes, adjusting, trying to not have teachers have 5 classes back to back if possible. We'll finally get to a point near the end of May. We'll start working with individual students about specific things that they might not be getting. If kids requested electives, they didn't get those, trying to identify other electives, and then we want to get schedules in the hands of kids before the end of the school year. So it's usually pretty much all done by the first week or so of June. So you're about to end that season. And then there's me going in and making decisions about room assignments and trying to figure out how to make all of that stuff work. So we have temporary room assignments, initial room assignments done through Power School, but then I was, particularly this last year, going and fiddle with things to try to balance and have teachers be in consistent classrooms as much as possible, that sort of thing.
Are you nearly the sole person for the initial stage, or do you have a
right
arm that does a lot of this stuff?
No, lots of people are involved in it. I will do a little bit of detail work because it's good for me to make sure that I'm keeping my head fresh on stuff, because when I start going in and playing with, when I start going in and trying to make decisions about things, I need to remember how all the data entry works and where you change this and where you change that. But Jody and Janine Eichhorst, who's our registrar, they do a lot of work around setting stuff up within Power School. Brian Cody, assistant principal, has historically done a lot. New assistant principal, it's her second year, Carrie O'Donnell. I'm going to probably throw some stuff at her as well so that she can kind of see how it builds. The guidance counselors don't do much in the way of data entry, but then they'll do a lot of looking at it and trying to figure stuff out. But Jody and Janine have historically done a pretty significant amount of work in concert with guidance. But I like to keep my hand in a fair amount of it while not having that pull me away, because then we're also doing things like teacher evaluations, getting ready for graduation, all that sort of stuff.
Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, no worries. So do we have a quorum? Can we rock and roll? All right, so thanks everyone for being here. So the first thing on the agenda for tonight was Jody was going to look and see what kind of information she could glean from looking at builds historically, the extent to which she could get a sense of historical trends around how high school space has impacted the extent to which kids get the courses that they want. Very briefly, I mean, I just talked a little bit about the process. When kids register for courses, they're requesting specific things, whether it's core classes or electives classes, and then we're assigning teachers to numbers of sections, and then Power School tries to marry all those things in the most efficient way possible. But not everybody gets everything they want, and we prioritize different classes. Core classes, in particular singleton classes, end up usually being prioritized above everything else. So like the first class, I think I've said this before, the first class that gets scheduled before any other class is band. Because band has a lot of kids, and it has kids from all 4 grade levels. So if you wait to schedule band and kind of the process until later, kids aren't going to be able to get it. So you schedule band first. Classes you might think would get scheduled earlier, like English, actually oftentimes gets scheduled later because there are lots and lots of sections, so it's relatively flexible where you can move it around. So a class that only meets once, where there's only one section of it, we're going to try to schedule earlier to try to make sure that gets accommodated, but we can go and we can fiddle with those things in the build process. But so we're trying to, the goal is to maximize the number of students who get the number of the classes that they signed up for. And so that's what Michael and I had asked Jody to speak to, is how has that played out over the years as we've had more students in the building and we've become more constrained in space? Has that, to what extent has that, in what ways might that have had an impact on the percentage of kids getting what they want to get? So can I turn it over to you?
You can. So there's not much that I know you guys wanted data. And the problem is the build turns over each year, and in fact, it's not even stable. Once we declare a build done, like we've gone through, guidance thinks we can reconcile enough of the conflicts, we then start fixing things. And so what the kids don't get is no longer relevant. Do you know what I mean? The question it comes down to is more of, can you fill the student's schedule appropriately? So maybe I wanted digital photography, but I get ceramics. Occasionally, those unreconcilable things will come down to, I'm a senior and I want AP Physics, AP English, Band, and AP German. And those 4 courses together meet in 3 different periods, so you can only get 3 of them. I don't retain, I was hoping that I had, I'm kind of a pack rat. If anybody's seen my office, I keep a lot of stuff, but I don't keep, there's nothing that I kept consistently year to year or even that was relevant that I could give you guys as data to say this is what it has looked like. In talking with Jane, we've agreed that rooms came into being as an issue Jeremy's last year.
Who's Jean?
Janine Eichhorst, our registrar. So she helps me with a lot of this
So that
stuff.
would have been 2010, 2011?
You've been here 3 years. We had
Started
Ralph.
2012. Ralph was 11, 12, so it would have been 10, 11.
Yeah. Where we started finding that, ooh, the build looks great, but look, there's a room issue. So then we had to go start putting constraints back. Each year we've had to tighten up a little bit more with that in terms of looking tighter at computer labs, the courses that all want into computer labs, science rooms, setting up facilities so that an English class couldn't schedule in a science room, kind of a thing. And vice versa. I've been here for long enough to have gone through times when we didn't have enough faculty in the building either to fully put kids into all their classes. They always got all their core classes, but we've had years where the kids had too many studies. That was not a function of the rooms that we had, that was a function of not having enough staff. We now have, we're staffing up, we're able to run enough classes for the kids to be fully booked, and at the same time, rooms are becoming a bigger issue. So I can't tell you, short of taking all of the rooms off and letting the system schedule how it will without rooms as an issue, and then putting all the rooms back on, and it's not flipping a switch, it's one by one, and looking then, if I did that, then I could say, okay, if we had all the rooms we wanted, it would look like this, but since we don't, it looks like this. That would be the only kind of hard data I could provide you regarding space. And that would be like building 2 whole schedules for us.
Yeah.
And
Sounds like fun.
I can't even.
It's not on your list of things to do.
No, because of the intricacies with it, because there is a tremendous amount, once you set it up, you know, Perry says you fiddle with it, but it's a lot more than fiddling with it. Because if I move, okay, so I've got 4 kids not getting AP German, so if I move German up here, what happens? Ooh, looks, a couple of kids didn't get physics and a couple of kids didn't get English. I've got to go in and make sure I can reconcile all those things before I figure out, no, there's really a problem, and it's with AP Calculus BC.
I can understand that just from trying to get 5 members of the Board of Selectmen to say, what date can we get for 5 of us to get together? And you clear one date, and it's the same kind of idea on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
But I guess I'd just like to ask the question then. I think I remember you're saying a number 10 to 15 classrooms in that vicinity is what you need. If you don't know how many you're missing through all this difficulty, how do you come up with that number?
So that's looking at the number of kids that we have, sections that we have, and use the word need. I mean, we're doing it right now, and I would.
So one of the things that will happen is we'll run intro to game design, right? But because of the constraints with the labs, the only place with the teacher free and a lab free is going to be D period. Maybe only 6 of the kids who signed up for game design can take it, D period. But there's kids who didn't get other classes that guidance will then shift into game design. They're not getting their first choice course, but I'm telling them they have to be fully enrolled. I mean, I think this is a piece of it. It's the kids are getting their honors English, but there's other courses that they're not getting that they want because a function of the schedule means they don't get it. Am I?
So I would say a couple things. One is you look at one of the things you look at is the room efficiency use. So what percentage of your rooms are you using across all your given periods? And our room efficiency use is somewhere around 92, 93% right now, which sounds really great, like we're using rooms really efficiently. And we are using rooms really efficiently, but the problem is that the more efficiently you use rooms, the more conflicts you start to get at. So 80 to 85% room efficiency is kind of the number that I've seen that you're using rooms efficiently, but it also gives you some flexibility. It's like you've got enough dates free on your calendar that you can figure out, because if everybody's super booked, then you're never going to find, that's going to impact which dates you can meet. You don't want everybody to not be doing anything. You want kind of enough flexibility, dates free on the calendar. 80 to 85% efficiency means that you're using your rooms efficiently, but there's still enough wiggle room that you don't start to have to make some of the trade-offs that you inevitably end up having to make. And I think that's where, and it wasn't, there were different numbers or types of rooms. The number of like general use classrooms, like classrooms that are used for English, math, social studies, foreign language. I can't remember what the specific number was. It was in one of the reports somewhere. It wasn't 10 to 15, it was fewer than that. I think it was something like, well, I don't want to quote a number because I can't remember what it is. Are you looking it up?
No, I'm looking up something else, but since you asked me.
But then there were other specialized, like, having another science classroom. And I think there were some additional spaces that we looked at as well.
I think this report.
And then there's also
may have it.
projected enrollment too. We're at a point now where there are periods of the day where I have only one classroom in the building free because of just the sheer number of classes that we're scheduling. So if our enrollment continues to increase, our efficiency starts to get to a point where we're not able to offer a class because there is simply not a place to do it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we have not hit that point yet. So I think when I've looked historically at, or at least over the last 3 years I've been talking about the year that Ralph was there, prior to that, we're not canceling classes because of room availability. In the build process, it becomes a constraint that impacts how many, like the extent to which kids get it. But we're not at a point right now where, oh yeah, we can't even run that class because we don't have rooms available. Like, we're not at that point. I mean, is that
No,
accurate?
because what we would do is that class would just default into the 1B period that's free, even if nobody could get it, and then guidance would be saying to kids, well, you have B period free and there's this class. This is what you're gonna, you don't have a lot of choices. This looks like what you're gonna take.
Well, what I recall, I think it was about 10 classrooms. And I think it was because there's 100 students that basically don't have a homeroom. And so there's at least 4 there, classrooms, if you want classrooms of 25. But if you want 20, you're going to go down to 5 or maybe even 6 classrooms. You wanted a larger art class.
Yep.
You wanted a science lab. I think you wanted one more computer center,
Yes.
which would have been 10. That's
Okay.
my recollection of what Perry had recommended.
That's my recollection
Yeah,
also.
that's
That
accurate.
4 or 5 for the study
General
hall,
use.
and then there was some specialty rooms that was the other ones to be about 10,
Yeah.
is my recollection.
One of our goals is to try to, I mean, you spoke to like kids who don't have an assigned space. One of our goals is to have, well, school committee policy is kids are supposed to carry 25 or more credits. And a year-long class is 4 credits, and there are 7 periods a day. So 25 credits means that you are fully booked 6 periods of the day, and then you've got maybe a semester-long class for that other period of the day.
Or gym class.
Or a gym class every other day for the year. As you start to get kids into more and more classes, then that you need more and more space in which to put them. Right now, we, in a given period, I would say we probably average, making up a number a little bit, I mean, I could find the actual number, but it's probably about 75 or so kids who are not scheduled in a class. So those kids are in study hall. The more we try to put those kids into classes, the more you're now trying to find a space that may or may not exist.
Well, I think it's worth noting that those study halls are literally study halls. They're
in the
not-
auditorium foyer.
They're not in classrooms, they're outside the auditorium, where the lighting's poor, where the slightest sound ricochets all over the place.
That's just a recent development, isn't it?
Well, we used to do it in the cafeteria,
Yeah.
and there were challenges. I mean, it wasn't, we had issues with being able to supervise students in the cafeteria because you've got 4 different ways that they can come in and out. Having it in the auditorium foyer was an attempt to get better control of, I mean, it wasn't like things were out of control, but it was a lot easier for a kid to slip out or for a kid to slip in, and so that has helped to address things like kids skipping classes or wandering the building. So we have study in 3 different places. The auditorium foyer, which is literally a hall. Kids can sign up to go to the media center, so they can get a permanent study hall pass to go to the media center. We have a pretty significant number of kids in the media center, which has its own ramifications. Then classes wanting to come and use the media center can become a relatively cramped space pretty quickly. And our freshmen are with Dave Emerson in a set classroom. But there are periods when he has more students than he can physically put in his classroom. So those kids will spill over into the annex of the cafeteria. And so then he's trying to supervise kids across the room he's in and the annex area.
Right, in some periods where he's got 50 kids.
Right.
So the other thing is that there are kids who are not in 25 credits simply because we don't have a space available. So I can't even say go into game design because game design's full, because based on where their academics and their courses are, what they've got free, there's no classes available to put them in that period. So it's not many. We've got, as we've added staff, we're in better shape, but
So would you say it's fair to say that space constraints work for the most part on the margin in terms of kids' ability to get the classes that they want? And when it comes to core classes, we're making sure that kids are in their core classes. And we have a very good hit rate on that. So we're making that work.
But is that, I mean, I guess, is that saying that someone's getting a physics, but maybe not the physics that they want.
No, we're giving them the physics that they want.
Okay.
We are,
Almost always.
yeah, in very few cases are we saying, you wanted to take college prep physics, but we don't have any space available, so you have to take accelerated physics.
But the 5 credit, 4 credit trade-off,
Right. We do the 5 credit, 4 credit trade-off does happen.
that absolutely happens.
But we're getting kids, with only a few exceptions, and most of those exceptions, again, correct me where you think I'm wrong, most of those exceptions would be not directly related to a room constraint, but more related to a kid's requested some very specific classes, and the way the schedule has been built, 2 of those classes meet in the same period, so I'm sorry, you're out of luck. There are 2 singletons. Now, the room constraints could somehow have been a factor that played
Yes.
in through Power School to get to that, these 2 classes are meeting at the same point, but you couldn't point to it and say it was a room issue. It could have also been a staffing issue, it could have been, it could have been a variety of things.
Right, but just to carry on for that for a second, so, and that's the piece that we really can't tell except by gut of working with the schedule, because it could be that what the student wanted is that it's a different course that is forced to schedule C period, so that means that teacher can only teach these other periods, which impacts the one he wanted, and that's why it's there. So a room constraint bounces all through the schedule, because even just those computer lab constraints force those particular teachers, including math teachers who are teaching computer science courses, to be in certain periods when those labs are free, which force their courses to be in the other periods. Do you know what I mean? So you can't, this is more than a ball of yarn. You can't pull the strings and find the end of it.
3 degrees of separation.
Yes. So there's not a way, even in my fictitious build, to kind of hand that to you.
But rooms, again, tell me where you think you disagree. Up till this point, rooms have not been a major constraint on students being able to take the courses that they want to take. I would say that personnel availability
Yes.
would be a larger constraint. And then there are other constraints that we naturally build into the schedule that happen. I mean, things like some of the cool interdisciplinary classes that we're doing back to back. That's a constraint. We've said this class has to meet one period adjacent to this class. That's a constraint that we've put in there. So rooms are one constraint, but there are lots of constraints. So to date, it would not be accurate to say, in my opinion, that rooms are significantly impacting the classes that students are able to get into. They do impact, but not significantly impact it to this point.
For core or everything, electives?
Again, the whole thing bounces around, and I think one impacts the other. And I agree with Perry. I think that we've been coming up with very good schedule builds with what we've got. But I'm telling you, I think this cup is full.
But what I'm hearing is, though, you've got constraints between the 4 and 5 credit labs courses.
Yep.
That is a real
And
issue.
aside from those, all the core courses get taken care of. And it becomes a bouncing game. Students bounce among the electives.
Yes.
They may not get what they want.
Yep.
I had an understanding that, in particular, because some courses only had one section, there's if you're taking band, you're basically logically prohibited from taking a bunch of courses because they're only offered at the same time that band is offered.
I don't think that's the case, because in the schedule build process, Power School is saying, okay, here are the kids who are taking band, here are the other classes that these kids are requesting, let's figure out how to get these kids into those classes. The one place where band was constraining, or you could say that other things constrained band, at least that immediately jumps to my mind, was sophomore year and junior year with AP Bio and AP Chem, because AP Biology is a double period class. Essentially, in most schools, kids will take a year of biology, and then if they want to, in a later year, they'll take a year of AP Biology. We essentially teach biology and AP Biology in the same year by doing it across 2 periods. So we kind of combine the curricula together and teach it across 2 periods. So you're taking AP Bio 2 periods per day. So if you take AP Bio, and it's offered in the sophomore year, it's 2 classes. You're also going to take an English class, you're going to take a math class, you're going to take a foreign language class most likely, you're you're going to take a social studies class, and then you've got to take wellness because that's required. That's every other day all year, so that's 6.5 classes. So then where do you put band? It's only a 7-period day. So what we've done a couple things, and then same thing with chemistry, the junior, AP chemistry is a double period class. We're talking about a relatively small number of kids, but those are kids who are probably disproportionately more likely to be in band. So we've done a couple things to try to address that. One is this year, for the first time, we offered an honors biology class, which is a 5-credit class, so it doesn't mean 2 periods every day. It means 1 period every day and a 2nd period every 4th day. So then you can run wellness opposite that, so that gives you the flexibility to still have band. But kids can still take an advanced biology class. Not for AP credit, but it's an advanced biology class. Band teacher and chorus teacher, because chorus is in the same boat. Band has more kids, but chorus is in the same boat. Band teacher and chorus teacher have been flexible and allowed kids to do things like come to band every other day opposite their PE class. So that's more of a burden on the kid, but they're still able to be in the band class. We've also, the wellness department, PE department, introduced something called independent wellness, which allows a kid to kind of do their wellness work outside of the school day, so then that frees them up to be able to take band. So we tried to create creative solutions for that. And the same thing is true for the kid who absolutely loves art and wants to take a full year of art every year and also wants to take AP Bio, or the kid who loves drama and wants to take a full year of drama every year and take AP Bio.
Is band a double period?
1 period.
Single period.
Just a rock in the stream, you might say, in terms of all the other scheduling things that happen.
Because it's the largest class. I can't think of another class that has as many kids assigned to it as band.
No, and
You can't divide it into sections the way you could in art class.
right.
Exactly.
And it used to be a smaller number. The number is definitely growing, and just going through signups, I'll tell you, you've got kids wanting to take a year of computer science, kids doing a year of art. I mean, the kids are, as we have more courses for their interest areas and they're pursuing them, it is that this is becoming a bigger question sophomore and junior year, okay? But I would also say that some of what I'm sure you've heard from other people in the community in terms of the conflicts would come out senior year where, yep, there's, 60, 70 kids in band and 15 or 20 of them are seniors, but only 3 are in AP German and 3 are in AP French and 3 are in Honors Latin 4. So then the foreign languages there's not enough kids to build around those periods. So maybe AP Math works. I end up always with seniors who are looking at a bunch of APs and band, and we're 1 period short. And it's because they spread out across 4 foreign languages. Those 4 foreign languages are all going to be singletons. Maybe their math is a double, and their honors and their AP English or their honors English is double, or if they're in accelerated English, that's a single period. So that piece, and this is critical to the seniors, they want their classes, and these are their terminating high-end classes. And when you've been in band all your life, it's a pretty tough thing to give it up senior year.
Yeah.
So, and that, there's usually a hue and cry about.
And if I'm say a sophomore and I want to take band, are there several different opportunities, or are kind of everybody at a particular band level show up in one section?
There's one concert band class, and freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors all take that as A period. They all take A period concert band. There are jazz band, which is separate from that, at different periods. So there are other music opportunities. We also offer guitar classes and piano classes, things like that.
So you might have a population of 70-ish or 50-ish
Concert
or
band,
something.
it's pretty significant.
It's
growing.
Yes.
So above 5%, but not quite 10% of the school wants to be in one place.
Yes.
At
And
one time.
I
Someplace
have
in there, right?
been at Neshoba when it was closer to certainly 10%. I mean, it kind of, music ebbs and flows. And I think when we had 8 periods and it was easier to schedule, the kids' classes, the band was bigger.
Other questions about rooms and how rooms kind of play into the scheduling process and how rooms
Hypothetical question.
impacted? Yeah.
So what point? if you didn't have school choice kids, the numbers are going to change. Hypothetical, if they just weren't now, today. It stands to reason you have a lot more flexibility on rooms than you do today.
25 kids a class, you're spreading them across all the classes.
How many kids, school
It's
choice?
100.
A total of 100 at the high
Okay.
school, 25 per graduating class.
Okay, so if you had 100 less kids,
So I'm going to try to avoid some of the political pieces of that and just say that
Yeah.
if you magically had fewer kids at the high school than we currently have, then that reduces rooms as a constraint. Clearly, reducing the number of kids could then have implications in terms of the number of teachers we have and staffing and all that stuff, so that could create other constraints that then impact that. If you've got the smaller your high school and the fewer kids you have, the harder it is to have more specialized classes. The bigger a school you are, the more kids you have, the more staff you have, the more specialized you can become with the offerings. So anytime you substantially reduce the number of kids, that's I would imagine going to have implications in terms of how specialized you can be with
that's the same thing
the
we
other
have for
stuff.
Minutemen all the time.
Right, we want a bigger population
Yeah.
so we can have
Yeah.
diversity
Yeah.
in our.
And it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
So you get 200 extra people and you can do all kinds of stuff you couldn't do with 700 versus 500.
Right.
That's kind of the argument that's
I mean,
going on.
and that's true.
On
And
that.
there are always trade-offs. The more kids you have, the less personal the environment feels. 1,100, we're 1,080-ish. It's a nice size in that you still have a sense that you know who the kids are and staff know each other, and it still feels kind of like a community when you start to get up to 1,700, 1,800, 2,000, 2,500 kids, big high schools. It starts to feel very impersonal, and some high schools will break up into different houses and things like that. So there are trade-offs for there are always trade-offs for getting bigger or getting smaller. But if you suddenly had 100 fewer kids at the school, then that would have a commensurate easing in terms of rooms as a constraint, but would create, I would imagine, would create other kinds of constraints,
Okay.
I hear you.
if that makes sense.
The year that the previous principal left, that you started to have an impression that it's more of a challenge, what was that school year again?
2010, 11?
I guess.
Do you know what the
11?
number was then?
So you arrived in 11-12, or?
I started 2012. The 2012-13 school year, we had an interim principal, Ralph Olson, who was there the 2011-12 school year.
I think 2011 was the first science lab proposal.
That was when Ralph was there.
Well, I think that started to kick in, but when I got there was when it kind of got full bore. It was
Yeah,
that year.
the proposal,
started to kick in
Popped
his
up.
I
year.
think it was in May of
2011.
2011 that it went to the towns, right?
No. I think it was,
It had to be at least 12, because I know that my daughter was out.
Okay.
and it was, because the vote was made to 2013, because I remember being in Lancaster when they took the vote.
Oh, okay.
But do you know what the enrollment was in 10, 11?
I didn't bring my laptop, I could have pulled up.
So those would be in the budgets for those years, because the budgets get shown in each of the.
Oh, I
years,
have them
right?
back, I didn't
I
bring.
mean, just us, we could figure it out by going to the budget years and seeing what the population is calculated there.
I've got profiles for every year with the
Can I
with the
find it to
October
Power School?
1st.
If I go to Power School, can I figure it out? Okay.
No, it's on the profile, but I just didn't bring my,
Along those lines, do you have a sense of your projection population for next year? Like you're about 1080 now, is that right?
So very rough. Yeah, we started the school year, I think we were like 1087, and I think we've gone down a little bit since then. I'm kind of using the number 1100-ish. We went up more this year than I thought. Last year we were like in the high 1030s, I think. And then we started this year 40 or 50 kids bigger. I didn't think we were going to have that many more kids. We ended up retaining more incoming students than we had expected, and really didn't lose many kids. And the outgoing senior class was significantly smaller than the rising senior class. So next year, I'm anticipating that we'll gain between like 15 and 25, but if we only gained 5 kids, that wouldn't shock me. If we gained 30 kids, that wouldn't shock me. But I would say rough numbers, 15 to 25, but that's a very inexact science.
and I looked not too long ago at the last 5 years of our withdrawals minus the enrollments, and it looks like we're netting around 20 kids an increase. So of the kids who withdraw and move to another town, another state, whatever, or the kids who move in.
And that's separate from the already within district.
That's separate from bringing up the 8th grade class.
So something like that could be relatively significant. You know, if the rising 9th grade class, if
Keep
that
them on.
stays big, and we net another 15 to 20 kids, then we could be looking at, 30 to 40 more kids next year than we have this year. I would be a little surprised if we went above 30, but that will be challenging.
Right, the cup is full, in my opinion, with the schedule, building the schedule.
Challenging in multiple dimensions, both common activities as well as class scheduling and maybe other kinds of stuff.
That would be, it would be hard for me to imagine not having to make some more substantial trade-offs. I mean, not dramatic, not like, hundreds and hundreds of kids are scheduled in English classes dramatic, but I think then we would really start making some more specific trade-offs in terms of room availability.
When do you anticipate the modular classroom coming online?
So
2 classrooms?
it's in the budget right now, the proposed budget, and I know that there's still meetings to discuss that. My understanding is that the plan would be for those 2 modular classrooms to be set up over the course of the summer and be available for this coming school year. That's my understanding of where things stand.
There's not a lot of work.
Have you heard anything differently?
Well, I know they want to get them out of combo quickly, so.
But more to the point, it's a dual point. We want them out and you need them, so
Right.
it's working together.
Giving us 2 additional classrooms would be helpful. That would certainly be helpful.
If magically is it fair to say that the full-time equivalent teachers have risen somewhat over the last 5 years so that you actually are able to use the spaces in the sense of having a teacher present in a way that may not have been the case in...
Yeah, we have, I think
2011.
we've tried to have staffing keep pace with enrollment increases and also with, trying to offer some different kinds of programming. And as number of kids increase, there's both kind of the having enough teachers to teach those classes and then support systems in place as well. Things like, after you add a certain number of kids, you've got to staff up in guidance as well because now guidance counselors are carrying a very heavy load of kids, or you have to staff up in special education because more kids have IEPs, that sort of thing. So, I think you probably have a better historical sense of it than I do, but at least the 3 years that I've been here, I felt as though we've done a really nice job of trying to keep up with, the community's really supported keeping up with enrollment growth and trying to expand some programs where possible.
Yeah, of course, it's not like we've seen a 20% increase in
Right.
staff or something.
Oh, yeah, no, it hasn't been, for example, we
Adding-
had a couple part-time positions in like English and math and theater arts this last year to try to keep up with stuff. So I think class sizes have stayed relatively constant, so the staffing increases have kind of matched that.
I think we're just back to where we should be. If you remember when we renovated the high school, right afterwards, we had a huge financial problem in the district, and we laid off a lot of staff, and we had kids severely underbooked at that point in time.
This is around 2002-ish or 3-ish, that far back?
Yeah. Right, way back.
Yep.
We built the foods room and the foods teacher retired and she didn't get replaced. We went through we were down.
Several years.
We
we've
had
no foods.
No foods, barely any business. We had kids with 2 studies, 2.5 studies. We had kids severely underbooked and we were not meeting all the graduation requirements for computer applications because we just couldn't. We didn't have teachers. So
What happens when you don't meet the requirements?
superintendent at the time gave us permission to waive if we couldn't get them scheduled into it. We couldn't not graduate the kids.
Now, there's another requirement or about the number of hours of teaching that a student should have every week or every semester. And because we have a lot of kids in studies, there's a large portion of the school not meeting that. Is that correct?
So the state requires that in high school, there be 909, a minimum of 990 instructional hours scheduled. So every year I go through and I figure out how many hours of instruction are kids in. According to the state's definition, a directed study where there's an adult who's there kind of directing students does count towards the 990 instructional hours. So I would argue and do every year that the study environment that we have is a directed study and therefore meets the state's definition. I think I've got lots of colleagues who are making the same arguments with similar circumstances as far as what directed studies look like. Our total number of instructional hours exceeds 990. It's somewhere around like 1,020-ish.
What's the consequence of not getting the 990?
I don't know. I've never been in a situation where.
And you haven't heard of anybody?
I have not heard of someone who has had has been found to be below the 990.
So that's not a recommendation, it's a hard standard.
Yes.
State law.
State statute.
Kinda like
990 and 180 days, both are required.
Okay. And that's 990 hours a year?
990 instructional hours. Yep. Each year. So I build my spreadsheet and I take out all the passing time and I figure out all the early release days and late start days and lunch and all that stuff. I take all that stuff out and figure out how many hours of time are kids actually in a class.
So this actually drives how long is the school year. You present to the school committee, well, I need you to end at X day of the year because I need those hours.
It's not the number of days because
hours.
It's
You get
180
your hours out
days,
of
but
the day.
the schedule, when we start and when we stop,
Right.
that is certainly a fact. I mean, one thing, for example, that I've proposed is that we look at doing late starts over the course of the year at the high school to allow high school teachers to have time to be working together on curriculum instruction assessment, because that's very difficult to build into a master schedule. And so one of the factors that I have to include in my proposal is making sure that we meet our 990 instructional hours. So if we have a certain number of days over the year where we have 2-hour late starts, I have to take that out to make sure that we're still hitting 990 instructional hours.
And does the teacher's contract constrain some of your capability in terms of changing your number of days, or is that something you need to take care of?
Well, I mean, there are things that are specified by the teacher's contract that impact things like when the school year starts in the teacher's contract. There's a specification around the school year not being able to start prior to a certain day. Teachers can only be scheduled for so much time. So I can't, tell a teacher that they have to do study hall every day of the week because the teacher contract specifies how much time teachers can be.
And on the back end, suppose you decided, I think for flexibility, I need an extra 2 days out of the school year just so I get my hours up. Is that allowed by your contract, or do you have to renegotiate if you were to have some kind of managerial point of view?
First of all, the school committee makes decisions about district calendar.
Right.
So the number of days of instruction is a decision made by the school committee, and the teacher contract stipulates how many days they work over the course of the year, and it stipulates how many days there are for professional development and things like that. So
in order to increase the number of days, you'd have to bargain.
Correct. So that would become then something that would need to be bargained.
So you're constrained, is the short answer,
Yes.
by the contract.
Yes. I'm not jonesing to
Right.
suddenly make us 190 school days.
I understand.
I mean, it's not a bad idea. I mean, there's a
Been so
tremendous
much
amount of
space
research
problems.
that draws some very clear correlations between the amount of time spent on learning and how much people learn. But
On the flexibility of curriculum and classroom offerings, to what extent does what happens in the 8th grade potentially influence or make it challenging in terms of needing to serve a particular population that may be doing really well or not so well in 8th grade, and so you have this population you need to accommodate? To what extent do you have that kind of conversation and discussion about curriculum and how that influences all the other challenges you have for scheduling and so forth?
So the learning experiences of every year impact then where kids are for the following year. So, what happens in kindergarten impacts what happens in first grade, what happens in first grade impacts what happens in second grade, and so on. The students that we get into ninth grade come well prepared academically. I mean, there's eighth grade teachers aren't just making it up as they go along. There's clearly articulated curriculum at the state level and at the district level around the specific skills and knowledge that the kids are supposed to acquire from year to year. So we are part of an overall sequence. The kids who come to us well prepared now. I mean, in any population of kids, you can have kids who are higher achieving, lower achieving, have different areas of need. And so, of course, kids are going to come to us with different areas of need. But by and large, the kids are coming from 8th grade into 9th grade with strong skills, ready to do what we think of as 9th grade work across the different subject areas.
Are you asking in terms of like how many
part of why I asked that,
accelerated versus...
Well, yeah, part of why I asked that is I took courses in 7th and 8th grade, which I ended up not having to take in high school because I had this great opportunity. So I ended up, for better or worse, I left high school at the end of my junior year because my district made it possible for me to get out.
Yep.
And so, sort of curiosity to find out what kind of both opportunities but also constraints you guys get faced with in terms of the exceptional people, whether they're at one end or the other end of the spectrum, and being able to accommodate them. Because I think in any population of people, the hardest people to deal with,
right,
because you have to think about them especially, are the non-average people.
There aren't as many.
Right.
And so from a resource standpoint, it's harder to devote resources when you're devoting them to fewer numbers of people. So I would say that we have pretty strong programming across the spectrum for kids who come in struggling, with deficient skills. We have pretty decent programming, although that's an area where I want us to continue to build. But we have pretty decent programming to help support those kids, whether they come in with an IEP, whether they don't come in with an IEP, if they come in with different social emotional challenges, if they come in as relatively anxious kids. We've got pretty strong staffing and programming to support kids who come in with varieties of challenges. And for kids who come in who are very high achievers, we've got strong programming for them as well. I mean, we have one simple way to look at it is like number of different AP courses that we offer. We start offering AP courses in the sophomore year, which is relatively unusual for high schools. We offer a very significant number of AP classes for kids. And we work it out if we have a kid who comes in who is accelerated beyond what would be considered, even atypical for atypical. And one example is we have a student, an 8th grade student so most 8th graders take either 8th grade math or Algebra 1. And then as they go into 9th grade, if they took 8th grade math, they take Algebra 1 their 9th grade year. If they took Algebra 1 in 8th grade, they take Algebra 2 their 9th grade year. And we have kind of just logical course sequences for them. But there's an 8th grader in district who was ready to be accelerated, and so is taking Algebra 2. And we have a web-based company that we work with. And so this student was able to take a web-based Algebra 2 course. So this student will be a year ahead, if you will, of where advanced students would normally be. We'll accommodate that. We have kids each year who are kind of in that situation, and we figure out flexible ways to try to accommodate those kids. So I think we've got a pretty good range of stuff for kids. Not that we don't always want to try to beef it up, but I don't see huge areas of deficiency.
Okay. So I'm not hearing there's a lot of activity that could be conducted in 8th grade that makes a difference for this particular challenge that we're discussing.
Right, and years past, we would have, kids might exceed and go out and do dual enrollment, exceed what we offered and go out and do dual enrollment, and now we have classes for them. So they stay.
Okay, we're kind of getting the field here.
Yes, we are.
So, interim report. Any other questions related to scheduling and space before we get to this? Bob, do you mind if I kind of turn it over to you to summarize?
No, that's fine. We presented this, I think we presented this back in February, and or maybe it was in January, actually. And then there were some changes that people wanted to make. I don't have my notes any longer about what those changes were, but I did incorporate them in here. So I don't know if there's need for any more discussion or on the general observations. Should we go over these step by step, or?
I mean, like, I had my notes from what was discussed, kind of what have you, and I went through it, and it looked like things were generally picked up. There was one item that I thought was discussed and was going to get changed, but doesn't appear to be, and whether that's from a notation on my part or it wasn't incorporated, but on item 6 on the first page, it says increased maintenance and small capital projects. At least in my notes, my recollection, we had talked about getting rid of the word small. There's some capital projects that are, but small is very loosey-goosey, like what's small to someone is maybe not small to someone else.
I remember that.
In kind of a,
All right. Is
that's the
everyone
only thing
comfortable
in my
with
notes.
taking the word small out?
Sure.
Okay.
The first one, you say approximately 100 students per period are not scheduled for instruction due to lack of classrooms and laboratory facilities. As I read that, it sounds to me as though we're saying we would be scheduling these students if it weren't for lack of classrooms and laboratory facilities, but I'm not sure that that's an accurate statement.
Another study hall, right? I mean,
Study hall isn't just an artifact of, in fact, it's not primarily an artifact of the amount of space we have available. It's an artifact of, we're trying to schedule kids into 25 credits, but that leaves 3 credits of time available. So it is common for a student does not need to be scheduled into a class every period. We don't require that. School committee doesn't require that. So it is most kids in the building will have a study hall, not as a result of we have to force you to be in a study hall because we don't have space to put you somewhere else, but because of the number of required credits, and kids like having a study hall, it's time to get stuff done.
Okay.
If we were to try to schedule all of those kids into classes every period, I don't think we would have the space available to do it.
Okay. But it could be that you have more than 100 kids per period in study hall,
Yes.
which would address your point. I mean, we haven't discussed this before, but if you have 120 or 125 kids in study hall per period, the impression we've gotten is that 100 of them are there because there's no classroom to put them in. But that's not to say you only have 100 per period.
So when you include freshmen, I think that's true. I think the numbers are higher, but there's also not a teacher teaching, there's not a, there'd need to be a.
I understand that, but
I don't think we have 100 kids who aren't scheduled in classes because we don't have space available for them. I think it's primarily because they've got,
They want the study hall.
yeah, they're not scheduling themselves in 28
So
credits.
from our perspective, we would look just at those kids who are under 25 credits and say they can't get a class. They would be in a class, but we don't have one for them.
I thought,
But what you're talking about is anybody who has a study.
I thought the discussion was, the intent was to have, whether it's electives or different things, that someone would have something all 7 periods every day, and that there's no really built-in study halls with a preference. I thought, like you were saying, that the directed kind of
Directed study.
directed study for the 990 hours was not the preferred way to do it, but it's the way to deal with the state law that you need to kind of meet those things. And I mean, it was my understanding that clearly there was 100 kids that if there were 4 more classrooms magically attached to the
Right.
school, they wouldn't be in study hall, they'd be
taking additional classes, additional electives.
I understood it meant that they may or may not be in study hall, but they would not be on the floor in front of the auditorium, they would be in a classroom.
So I think it is true that if we had more class space available, we would conduct study hall differently, yes.
So
But-
what would you say that number one ought to say?
Well, I mean, I'm struggling with that because the policy says that kids only have to be scheduled in 25 credits. So, I mean, I think it would be great if kids were scheduled into more classes, but we don't have anything that says they have to be scheduled in more classes. So a kid electing to have a study hall and they're scheduled in 25 credits, like I don't have anything where I would say, well, no, you really should be fully booked, because that's not, I mean, if I were going to make that argument that I want every kid to be fully booked, then I would be going to the superintendent and the school committee and saying, I want to change the minimum credit requirements. I mean, the minimum credit requirement is 25 credits, and that's not fully booked. So I'm not sure that it's accurate to say that that number of kids are not scheduled into a class because we don't have rooms available. It's because they're choosing not to fully book themselves. And it would be great to have that as a goal, but that's not enshrined in policy.
So,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, but what you're implying is that if they wanted a class, you could accommodate them.
That those 100 kids? No, I don't think we could accommodate them.
So,
Well, then the number you can't accommodate is the number we're talking about.
I guess what I'm struggling with is where it says, are not scheduled for instruction due to lack of classrooms. And that implies to me that if we had the classroom space, we would be scheduling them in those classrooms. And I don't think, for some of them, yes, but not for all of them, because they don't have to be fully booked.
So going back to my notes, so basically the original draft report that we reviewed at the last meeting, the way it's worded, how it was originally drafted was not about 100 students. It was most students are not offered a full day of instruction due to a lack of classrooms and laboratory facilities. There was a discussion of, well, what's most students? Can we kind of put a number on it?
Yeah.
Then there was a discussion about the 100. And so like it kind of evolved into, let's tie that into, into something. So it might have kind of mixed up a couple of different thoughts. But at least my understanding was that there seemed to be a shortage of something of classrooms. Well, maybe it was for whether better organized study halls, or kids having to be able to take, additional classes.
I mean, that is one of the reasons why we have study hall in the auditorium foyer, because we don't have, my initial hope was to move it out of the cafeteria and into classrooms, but we don't have the classrooms available to be able to accommodate that. I think that's something different than we're not scheduling those kids in classes because the classrooms or the classes aren't available for them. I mean, I think it would be accurate to say that approximately 100 students per period are not scheduled for instruction, and there is not classroom and laboratory facilities to accommodate them. But I don't think it would be accurate to say that those kids are not scheduled because we do not have the space to accommodate them. If that makes sense? I just want to be very careful that we're not,
Yes.
Okay.
because I know this is going to be, there'll be lots of discussion. I don't want there to be anything in this that would come back and turn out to be, well, wait a minute, hold on, we flavored the language this way to make it seem like we were making an argument for something.
I mean, the verbiage you just talked about, I don't think it changes the flavor of what we were trying to get out of that statement.
Okay, fair enough.
At least in my opinion.
Yep.
So looking at it from
Let me make sure I got that, though. So it would say approximately 100 students per period are not scheduled for instruction, and there is not the classrooms to accommodate them.
If they so.
Period after instruction and have a second sentence. So it's not part of the same, it's not a cause and effect statement. That's my opinion.
let me interrupt your editing for a moment. In your ideal world, what would a study hall space look like? If you were to
It would
place
be in a classroom with a teacher, and it would be more directive than it currently is.
15 to 20 kids.
Yes.
So smaller groups rather than
Smaller
larger.
group of kids with an individual
Close to the
teacher.
classroom.
They're going to a specific classroom, and every day they go to that classroom space. That teacher is ideally in his or her own classroom space, or at least there's some common classroom space. And so that's the study hall. That's the space that the kids are going to for study hall every day.
Right, and in my dream as a guidance counselor, if you were struggling with math, I would have your study hall scheduled in with a math teacher.
Yeah,
Well, how
and there would be
about-
4 of them and you'd have choices
Yes.
because of that, right? If you had those 4 extra classrooms.
Approximately,
In my idea
Or
world.
5 maybe.
100 students per period are not in suitable classrooms or laboratories.
True. They're in the
True, but
media
is
center.
is there an implication there that's,
No, but Perry, if you
okay.
you magically put in the staff to put everybody in small studies that we don't have rooms for.
Right, I want to be careful that there's not a sense that there's an implication that's
Right.
pushing towards a goal, and the implication is not entirely there.
You know, I don't want to do any unnecessary inflammation either, but to me, this is a big deal. You know, there's 100 students who, and the problem is this has to be brief, or else people aren't going to remember it,
Yep.
right? So there's about 100 students
Yep.
that they're in study halls,
They're not assigned into a classroom.
and, you know, probably a large portion of them would be in a class if you had more classes to offer.
Do you agree with that?
Even if that class was called directed study.
Yes. They would be in a classroom that would be a more conducive learning environment.
But that's not the same as saying that they would be taking separate courses.
Right, that's not the same thing as they'd be in a science class.
But we're talking strictly about space, and you have approximately 100 students per period are not in a classroom.
No, I'm not scheduled for instruction. Now, if you want to put directed instruction or something to,
There-
Are not in a classroom,
Right?
in a
You couldn't
classroom,
afford more aides. You couldn't
or
manage directed
space
study.
suitable for directed instruction. I don't want to undermine.
But I think everybody
argument.
understands like kind of what side, I mean, whatever language people are comfortable with, I'm comfortable with. I just wanted to,
Maybe you just need to throw in the sentence that says, for example, students have study hall in the auditorium lobby. And because this is the kind of thing we're talking about, and
agree.
maybe we need to just cut to brief, concise statements that don't try to be too general, because I think that's where we're running into problems, is that we're trying to be all-encompassing with this statement about not having enough space. And I agree that it's a problem, but I think maybe
but on the other hand, how many months now have we been talking
Talking
and trying
about
to boil
space.
something
We're
down
gonna get
to a
this done
page and a
tonight.
half, so
Right, but.
It is general.
But I do
mean,
think
yeah.
this is a specifically real example that people can understand their kid's study hall is in a hallway.
yes.
And for instance, the 10 through 12 study hall is in a hallway, which is what a foyer is.
yes. I just
Why-
happened to put some tables in it.
Right. But it's in a hallway. And the gym classes have, the theater classes have to troop past them, and
Yep.
it's, so I agree. I think putting an example there clarifies the language in front of it.
Okay, so let it be, and that's a question. Approximately 100 students per period are not in classrooms or space suitable for study. For example,
10 through 12 study,
The, s-
unassigned time is in the hallway.
the space,
What you want to be specific, grades 10
the
through...
auditorium foyer.
Yeah, grades 10 through 12 unassigned time is in the auditorium foyer.
For auditorium foyer, for example, auditorium foyer is used for study halls.
Yes.
Sounds good.
And as it turned out, the freshmen are in classrooms?
Freshmen are in, and when it's big, it's both the classroom and the cafeteria.
Is that,
But do you want-
called
For the
something different,
freshmen.
isn't it?
Freshman study skills.
Freshman study skills. Mix, some of the periods he can fit everybody in the classroom, but some of the periods he can't, and half of them are in the
So you may have
cafeteria.
20 and it may be 40,
Yeah.
something like that.
But I guess some of that stuff, and not to kind of be too nitpicky on it, but is someone to read that and kind of think, like, a foyer might be, like, if it's a big foyer, maybe there's plenty of room, versus talking about a hallway or something. I mean, that's what we're talking about, is that it's not really an appropriate
No, it's not.
space.
I personally call it hallway.
And, you know, kind of, I think a lot more people kind of,
I'm working on, I've got my prejudices, but I'm working on consensus here.
yeah.
Yeah, hallway.
Hallway.
On the other hand, foyer to me says very high ceiling and weird acoustics and things like that, so.
Bad
you know.
lighting.
I'm not sure what I think about when I hear foyer, so I prefer hallway.
I know it's difficult. I go to Friends of Drama meeting in that same space, and it's hard to be heard.
Yes.
And it's congested
Yes.
for 25 people, let alone 100 or 75 or whatever the number is.
Any other changes?
Can you read it out again?
The approximately 100 students per period are not in classrooms or space suitable for study. For example, auditorium hallway is used for study halls.
Yeah.
If we're going to be voting on this tonight, we're going to have to, is somebody taking some notes on it that we can...
I am,
Okay.
yeah.
So we can inform the other people that frequently attend these meetings.
So anything else?
What would you all think about a phrase like space limits some current and future programming, curricular programming? I mean, I think about things like theater classes, running them in the auditorium, but we have other things running in the auditorium.
Is
We
that
talked
covered
about-
by the next one? Some classrooms physically limit the ability of the teachers to teach, students are dissuaded from supplemental instruction due to lack of.
And if everyone thinks that covers it, I'm fine with that. I was just, when I went through the needs summary, one of the things that I talked about was future possibilities, you know, future programming, expanding computer science classes, things like that, and space constraints will limit expansion of future programming.
Let me address it this way. I want to do another interim report right away as soon as we pass this one.
Okay.
And kind of, you know, this is really a snapshot of where we were back in December.
Yep.
And we clearly have moved since then, and we haven't been able to pass this for you know,
fair enough.
weather and disease and a whole
Bob,
bunch
I'm
of
going
other
to keep my
reasons.
mouth shut through the rest of
No,
this.
that's fine. No, that's fine.
No, I got the hint.
I want to make sure this is, everyone's comfortable with this. But I do think we need to do an update to this right away.
And you
I'm-
say down that a future population, the physical plan consequences of increased enrollment remain to be examined. So that's, I
Yeah.
think, yeah, so you catch that.
Yeah. Any other changes? May I ask for a motion to accept the interim report as amended?
Can I just review the last part, the next steps? Just read through for my
Yeah.
own benefit. Refresh my memory. The last half doesn't quite say the future is planning is slightly impaired for lack of space, or at least acknowledge it. Am I missing out?
Just under the word draft, the effect of space limits on curriculum goals remains to be examined.
Ah, right. Fair enough.
Now may I have a motion?
Thank you for bearing with me.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion? You're the chair, you have to ask for the vote.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
All right,
That gets around the question of...
Vote carries unanimously.
thank you. All right, so I will update this right away and distribute.
Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
I would make a recommendation, though, if we wanted to get an interim report out more quickly, if we could do something with a projector or something and actually see changes and vote on it that night versus draft up changes, go back, write them up, cover it the next meeting, it kind of not only elongates it, but kind of, people get some new thoughts and new ideas and kind of whatever versus, okay, there's changes, let's put them on the screen and vote changes and be done with it, because it's not intended to be a big document, right? It's just a summary document, and I think it might push it along a little quicker.
I think that's good.
And do we have a projected date on when we want our next interim report done? Like, should we work backwards from?
I intend to have a draft available at our next meeting.
It's in 2 weeks.
I think so. I've been working on it already. That's why I think I can get it done.
All righty. You are in charge.
Well, that's where you guys have some work, by the way, in order to get that.
2
done.
weeks?
Yeah, he's not a little too devilishly on
Yeah.
2 weeks? Let me tell you about NEOS.
We just have a general process thought, question, and Perry's gonna shoot me on this one. Since this is a high school-focused study group, I think it's very helpful when you are here. I think some of the thoughts that you have put into this tonight might not have been heard if Michael had been here, if he had not been under the weather. So I guess what I'm saying is, to the extent you can do it, given everything you've got on your plate, I think it's very helpful to have you here when this high school task force meets.
And I will certainly, I've got on my calendar for to be here for the next meeting, and I want to try to be here for every meeting going forward. I mean, I want to be very careful to defer to the superintendent because he's looking at this as a district initiative. And
But at the same
chair
time,
of it.
with all due respect to him, you're the general in the field.
Yep, I'm living it day to day.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm living it
He's
day to
the
day.
5-star sitting up here, but you're living. I'm not saying come in and contradict him, but I think there are things that you could add that even he might not be able to elucidate as well as you.
Yeah, well, I'm in the building day to day. Yep, absolutely.
Can we just check and confirm, does everybody have the 19th of March on their calendar for the next meeting? Because when we met in December, we set the 19th of March as our meeting date, and tonight's meeting was a makeup for the one we missed in February.
I have it in my calendar. I looked at it today with a question mark after it.
Well, I know it's in my calendar, and I hope we have it.
Yeah, we had it.
But I don't want to just walk out of here assuming that we're going to have a meeting and then find
I've
out.
got it.
No, okay, so everyone is comfortable with, all right, so we confirmed, I'll put this in the minutes. Next meeting on March 19th. Okay.
Do we have a tentative date? Did we talk about further dates beyond that? Do we have a tentative date beyond that?
Yeah, I'm reluctant to try to do that tonight with
I
this many
understand.
people missing.
Yeah, and particularly without Michael here.
Yeah, Michael and
dates.
2 other school committee members. So as I said, I think we've covered a lot of ground. in December. I think it's appropriate to summarize it. I would like to think that this next interim report would be where we put some stakes in the ground, that these are things we know.
Yep.
And it would maybe emphasize different things we don't know yet, and thus lay out those areas we want to dive into more. I think one thing that we haven't touched on, I think Michael was going to touch on it tonight, but is future enrollment. Personally, I would like to, I'll just throw this out now so people can stew on it. I would like to go to the, I would like this committee to ask the school committee to fund a formal enrollment projection. I've got I found one from Brookline that was online. It was very helpful, professionally done. I'm willing to share that just as a illustration of, not that we need the same thing, but I would like to have this committee ask the school committee to fund a formal enrollment projection for the high school.
So they didn't
And I
have to
think
just use current
I think it's
funding.
got to come out of the school committee because it affects all three towns.
So it makes sense. I mean, you're dealing with 1080 or 1100. What is it going to be 5 years from now?
Yeah.
Our best guess.
Yeah.
Right, if we think it's going to be 1,050 5 years from now, that's one thing. If we think it's going to be 1,150 5 years from now, that's a whole different situation.
Now, there was some, and I don't remember kind of where it came from earlier on.
Yeah.
There was some enrollment stuff or forecasting stuff that was
Yeah.
part of the, I don't know who did it, or kind of
And I
It's just
have that.
current warm bodies in town, though. It's not
That's
talking
right.
about projected
Okay.
growth.
It says, here's your population in kindergarten, and here's your population in first
Okay,
grade.
it just kind of,
And they were using the term cohorts, which is really different than, education uses the word cohorts differently than I've ever heard it used. But
I believe
when all the cohorts get to the high school, what's the population going to be? It doesn't take into effect
All the open building
all the open
permits.
building permits and, other things in the area. So.
there is, I think, on the task force website, a study done by an association that the high school belongs to that is now several years old, and which quite emphatically does not take into account growth.
I think that's the one that you're referring to.
Yeah, it's the
yeah,
cohort.
that's
Yeah.
probably the one I'm referring to. I remember there was something, and I just couldn't remember.
Well, I remember looking at it, and it was projecting, for this year, 100 fewer students than we have.
Right.
So,
Right, the current numbers were inaccurate.
so is that something you would see being added to a next interim report as a recommendation for?
I would want to discuss it at the March 19th meeting and see if people want to consider that, and that could be, our next interim report says, we'll request this from the school committee, or something like that.
Personally, I think that's the most important thing we can do. I think it's the most responsible thing we can do as well. If we're looking at a 10-year growth and we'll be at 1,300 kids, we got to think about all sorts of stuff, including cafeteria space and everything else.
Well, whether or not we go with MSBA or not, and some of us are prejudiced to not want to do that, you're looking at a 10 to 20-year bond. And to not do forecasting for the duration of that bond.
Oh, right.
Put us in the position we're in today.
Yes. So, again, that's not something to settle tonight, just get the juices percolating.
One other thing, Harry, since you're here.
Yep.
I listened to your, and the show the high parents feel with it. I greatly appreciate your calls. I'm going to miss them next year when Lindsay's off in Worcester.
I can make sure we keep you on the.
But the nutshell, refresh me what's going on with this group coming in this weekend. Who are they? What's their work product going to be?
So NEASC is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. It's an accrediting agency. It's a nonprofit accrediting agency. There are multiple accrediting agencies throughout the country. They accredit schools and colleges, so high schools, colleges, and universities. We are a member of NEASC, and every 10 years we go through a reaccreditation process. There are 7 different standards that they base the accreditation and reaccreditation on, things like curriculum, instruction, assessment, community resources. So leading up to a visiting team coming to us, we do a year-long self-study, and we look at those 7 standards, and there are all kinds of very specific questions and indicators. And everybody within the high school serves on a committee for one of those 7 standards, collects lots of evidence, puts together a draft report of here's the extent to which we do and do not meet the elements of this standard, present that committee report to the faculty votes on it, and then once all those standards reports are approved by the faculty as a whole, then it becomes the self-study, which is that. So that's kind of our own internal review of ourselves. Then an external group of 16 educators come into the school.
Look at the same factors.
They're looking at the exact same standards. They're essentially going to produce the same document, but it's based on what they see, and they will use our self-study as a large piece of evidence. But they're coming in, so they show up on Sunday, they stay through Wednesday, they meet with everybody you could possibly imagine. They meet with staff members, they meet with students, they meet with school committee members, they meet with the superintendent, they meet with central office.
Tour the
facilities. They go into classrooms. They'll try to visit every classroom in the building at some point with students. They look at all kinds of work samples. We've collected reams and reams and reams of documentation around those standards. So they look at all this stuff, and then they produce a report similar to that about the extent to which we meet or do not meet the 7 standards. That report then goes to NEASC before we see it. NEASC kind of edits it a little bit, then it comes back to us, and there will be a reaccreditation recommendation. In other words, they will recommend that we not be reaccredited. That won't happen. Or they'll recommend that we be reaccredited, but pending certain actions on our part. And what's more important to me than the reaccreditation, because I can't possibly imagine that we won't be reaccredited as a high school, is the feedback that this visiting group of educators, outside eyes, gives us on here are the things you all seem to be doing really well, here are the things you need to continue to improve on.
Okay, the reason I bring that up is because back in the early part of my involvement with this, I went through this, and the words that keep coming up is something I've heard here, is the teachers, the people participating in this, talking about the need for collaboration, schedules and time and space. There's a lot of space
is
in here as well.
significantly mentioned throughout the
So it's not, it's something we're going to have to look at this new one coming back and see how does this inform our decisions.
I mentioned before, I've already started working on a new report. I went through that report, and I took out of it, I have a PowerPoint that says like science, art, music, cafeteria, whatever. And I cut and pasted every space-related issue in that report. This PowerPoint.
You deserve a medal.
Because otherwise I can't keep track of what do we know and what don't we know.
Yep.
And
and what's data and what's anecdotal.
Yeah,
and
I have no life, so I do this stuff. But
that's not what your kids say about you.
My kids say lots of things about me.
They do, in fact.
But yeah, so that report is something we will use.
Yes.
And the NEASC, the official NEASC report, I'm hoping we'll have by the summer. We may not have till the beginning of next fall, but that will be the formal NEASC report, and facilities is a large part of that report. So we will get feedback from NEASC about where our facilities work and develop.
So it kind of informs our timetable too. And we've got to, it would be short-sighted of us to have that resource coming in and say, well, we're going to have our final report in June or July or something for this task force.
Yeah.
How publishable is the interim back and forths that happen? Are those sort of private until it's actually final?
We don't see the report until it's finalized. It lives with the committee chair. So the work of the NEASC visiting committee is very private. So they have a set-up space in the high school. We are not allowed to go into that space. They are supposed to. I've been on NEASC visits where I've been part of the visiting team, and their deliberations are supposed to be kept private from the school, and the school doesn't see anything until the report comes in its final form. So there's lots of discussion amongst the
Right.
team. The chair might do
You
some
can tell what's
editing.
going on because of the questions and conversations that happen, but you don't actually necessarily know the report until.
No, because there's so much data to gather, it's almost scripted questions, you're gathering data, you write the report.
It's very formulaic.
Just before they leave, they will meet with faculty to kind of give 3 or 4 strengths and, commendations and recommendations, so you get kind of a high level, but then you get another one of those reports eventually.
I see.
How often is that site
10 years.
survey done?
10
Every
years.
10?
Yeah.
And didn't we, wasn't it actually postponed a year, so it's been 11 years or something?
It was postponed a year. I think
But we were on a 9-year because we asked for, our first accreditation happened, or not first, but the last one happened in the middle of the building construction project when we had a principal leave and a new principal step in, and we got a 1-year postponement then, so we were coming up on a 9-year, but then they offered extension, so it's really now 10 years.
I think you wanted to see if anybody had any additional questions on.
Yeah,
the
I mean,
last
what I had for the
presentation.
rest of the, and we're already past 8:30, I think we've accomplished a lot tonight, so I don't want to beat a dead horse. I can certainly pick this up on the 19th as well. What I had for the rest of the night, maybe set some agenda items for the March 19th meeting, if there are things that you are hoping I or Jody could do between now and the March 19th meeting, or if you're saying, a month from now, Perry, we really want to see this so I can get started on it, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So I can certainly start to go through this. We can, if people have immediate questions, I'm happy to answer those. If you would rather save this for the 19th for more substantive conversation, I can do that as well. Whatever.
No, for the 19th, I was hoping to report back to the committee on science lab stuff.
Okay.
So,
But that and this, I think, I'd rather have an opportunity when we get more, hopefully get more folks
Yeah.
here.
yeah,
You had walked about 2/3 of the way through this, hadn't you?
Yes,
At
yes.
the meeting now
Yeah,
a
I
couple
got
months
through
ago.
relatively,
Yeah.
most of it, I think.
Yeah.
Right, so I guess my question, Bob, is what are we looking for, like, what should I be thinking of going into this spring that this committee needs that I should, for instance, we will go into schedule building now with me thinking, is there a way for me to gather data that would be useful to this committee as we go through this process? So,
well, I think the one we'd asked you about, which is, how many kids don't get what they want because of space limitations. And I know teacher limitations play into that, but you're not going to hire more teachers than you have space for.
I mean, I think we can crunch, some of the numbers. It'll be April before we start to see that.
Yeah, I mean, you may not have it till July or something like that, but it's still going to be a valuable data point.
April's only 3 weeks away.
right, we can't, but it has to come, a faux schedule has to come before the real schedule. So I can't do it afterwards.
But we can report like the X percentage of kids were able
Well,
to
you
get
can-
initially scheduled into their classes, X percentage of kids were initially scheduled in their electives classes,
Yes.
and try to tease out where, we can do real-time updates on constraints, like computer lab stuff. That's something that we can do real-time. There are going to be science lab constraints, there's going to be, if you had a new business teacher.
Well, I think the theory is you take them out, right? You take out all those room constraints.
So yeah, I think that we can,
You just take out.
we could try doing that too. We could just run a mock schedule
That's
without room
theory.
constraints and then run another one with room constraints.
Right.
How challenging would that be to do?
Dual schedules. Like,
One other schedule
yeah,
for the other thing.
and
Janine's gonna kill me.
no, it's not going to be possible.
Anyway, sorry.
I think that's the only thing we need out of this,
Okay.
the upcoming scheduling stuff.
In terms of your current people, you do have a limited population of kids who have fewer credits than everybody would wish.
Yes.
Is it less than 3% or 2% of your kids that have the situation? So
No, it's probably bigger than that, isn't it?
24 that are under 25?
That are under 20, that are under
That are under
25?
25?
Well, there's under 25 and there's under 24.
Is it not so hard for you to
That's easy to
make
do.
a
Yeah, we
table
can,
of
let's bring
That I
that,
can
okay,
get.
actually the
so,
whole population, who's above and below? You've
Yep.
got people who are taking advantage of the facilities
Yep.
and people are just not able to or
And then the
can't.
question I would have for you is, do you want me to cull out, so like if you have EMT, that's 4 credits, but it's really at night, it's not during the day. Do you just want to look at daytime
I would
credits?
say just daytime credits.
Okay, if we look at daytime credits, that's a little more, but I can pull that out.
Well, it's a small one, but one of Mia's music things is in the afternoon.
All the music, so jazz band and the elite choirs, I'll give you credits in the afternoon too.
That's one of my pet peeves, because you don't have late buses for the musicians,
Yep.
but you have them for the sports.
So that is valuable to hear about. It is
Yeah.
part of the facility use
Right.
and
When
your
are they?
schedule.
They get through at 5:30. In the winter sports season, the last late bus is at 4:30. In fall and spring, they have a late bus at 6.
Yep.
So
For the
kids that take
athletes.
chorus can take the late bus, because they get through after the 4:30 bus, and then get a bus ride home. Otherwise, parents have to make arrangements to come pick them up. But those are classes, credit classes that are not during the school day.
That we could probably have for next week if we stay on.
So something that will happen as you build a schedule is that you will have 2 extra classrooms in your schedule.
Yeah.
There'll be
That
a
is
little
the
shift.
current plan.
Right, if the hopes and wishes and intent come forward.
That is the current plan. We will
Well, we
have 2
certainly have to
additional.
know that before we build the schedule.
We'll know it when the budget's done.
That whole
Okay.
process is greased, right? It's going forward. I mean,
We can plan.
Somebody wants to get rid of the darn things and
I don't
somebody
count
wants
on
them.
anything until the budget's passed.
When's the budget passed?
me,
Well,
May?
May-
the school committee votes on it.
yeah, but,
Well, yeah,
well, but it isn't
just because
effective
we
until.
vote on it doesn't
until the
mean that's
towns.
gonna be.
Towns.
Well,
So
We had a
town
discussion
meeting
about that
in
last
May.
wait a minute, the budget doesn't start till July 1st.
Right.
So I hope you're going to do something with those things before July 1st.
But for us, for building the schedule, once they know that they're coming
Oh,
towards us,
okay.
I don't care when they're when they actually arrive. Obviously, I care when they arrive, but
Okay.
if we
I'll be,
figure them in for building the schedule.
I mean, I can also, yeah. We'll know by the beginning of May, right?
Right. So as a consequence of
Yeah,
that,
I
So,
think
yeah.
so.
we
That's what
actually,
we'd be doing.
we have our platform shifting out from underneath us. We have temporary structures that are improving capability of the school. And so it'd be slightly different than the experience this year.
Yep.
Just an interesting shift in, what is it you're measuring? You're measuring a different school for next year.
Will it help?
Give another set of hypotheticals for 2 more classrooms.
Right, I'm not gonna ask anything, I'm just pointing it out.
Well,
Yeah,
two
you
would make it a
still
little
talking
better,
about
but 4 would make it a little better, and 6 would make it a little
Right.
better, and
Yeah.
8 would make it a little better, I mean, like.
And cafeteria space,
Right.
a lot of things. Guidance
Well, I move we
space,
adjourn.
Special item.
Before you do that, is there anything, can I just ask, is there anything else for the next meeting? I'm hearing that it sounds like you have a beginning of a new draft interim report.
Yep.
I can spend a little more substantive time finishing up this, and we can provide some data around the number of students who are enrolled at different credit numbers. Is there anything else that anyone would like added to the agenda for next?
I want to report out on my science lab visit.
You're going to report out on your
Yeah.
science lab?
Yes.
Okay,
But should be on the agenda, that's all.
okay. Sounds good.
And then we're going to discuss the possibility of requesting funding for an enrollment projection study.
Yeah, let's just talk about enrollment projections and,
Okay.
yeah.
Anything else for the agenda for next time?
That's enough.
You had graciously provided me a listing of the populations in all the sections, which was a many-page report. But it's not a management report. And I'm wondering if you have any kind of tabular thing that could just show the populations in each classroom in a way that can be
So
scanned
simple
in a
things
few
that
pages.
says, this class has 23 kids scheduled, and this class has
Right.
this scheduled. Yes, we have that.
Right, so it would be, I personally would be interested in seeing it. I don't know if others
The
would,
room
but
utilization report.
but my interest is
Section number.
getting a sense of the headroom in the various sections. Is it like many sections have 5, 8?
I actually have that
Two,
spreadsheet on my
or
laptop,
that
so I can,
like
so I
that.
can.
So that kind
When you
of
say headroom, do you mean in terms of spacing?
capacity of the
I mean, I've got-
section versus the classroom, kind of.
I've got a report that tells me
Great.
how many sections of math do we have, how many kids are in each section, and then I calculate the average head count in those sections, how many sections, what percentage of sections are below, 18 kids, what sections are
Right.
24, 25, that sort of thing. Yeah,
I would find that valuable, and I hope others would on this.
Do you want that by room? that what
I
you're
actually
asking?
don't know, and maybe I should go back and forth with you. I'm just trying to figure out how to give some perspective to everybody, whether by curriculum or by room, so they can get a sense of, oh, so we have no room in 3/4 of our sections, or we have some room in 3/4 of
When
our
you say room,
sections.
you
Meaning
mean
there's 20
There's
and
space
and the-
constraints adding.
right, and say there's only 19 people in a lot of sections, but the classroom holds 24, that kind of thing.
Okay.
What's the capacity of the high school in terms of the current
Seats.
curriculum?
That's what you're talking about, is seats.
Right. Vacancies or non-vacancies.
But I would think, I mean, I guess
That's
for
an
general
schedule.
consumption of that, for the committee to look at that, I would think that's one thing. To share that with the general population, I think gets a little dicey, because when we start looking at something that, and they go, well, here's one that only has 19
Right.
kids.
How come
in
this
it?
math class has 10 kids in it?
Anything presented in this meeting is public.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
It has to be room utilization because you've got the multi-section classes.
I'll show you something.
Well, I guess my point is that.
I think I have
19
something that's at least
24
close to what you.
Might seem
were
like, oh,
asking.
you got all this headroom, but then when you kind of factor in the schedule and kids and how, like it might seem like, someone might say, hey, that's underutilized
Yes.
classroom. When you factor in all the other variables that go into it, that it's not really an underutilized classroom, it's all the other variables are playing into
Right.
it. It's,
Right, every year
Multiple
there'll
constraints everywhere.
be, say 3 accelerated English classes and 2 are big at 25, 26, and then one has 15, and you're gonna be like, why is that? Well, it's because where the math classes lie, We work tremendously hard to try to balance things out. But there's always something in the schedule that's going to push one class smaller with a different section higher. I've never seen a year where I didn't have that somewhere, at least
Let me
once.
show you something and see if it's the kind of thing you're asking
Sure.
for. All right, so I have information from Jody about credit numbers and number of kids in different credit tiers, me finishing the needs summary, Bob reporting on the science lab conversation, course section enrollment information, and draft of next interim report. Sounds like a pretty full agenda.
Yeah, and what did you want for the study? For enrollment projections?
Yeah, I think he has that.
Discussion of
Oh, you have that?
Yeah.
Enrollment projections.
Probably enough for 2 meetings.
Anything else?
It's okay to be spring by
not that it's an agenda item, but could we possibly talk to Michael in between and kind of, I don't know if others think having a projector to kind of do some of those elements might be
We have a
useful.
projector. I mean, I know he's got a projector either here or in his
Okay.
office that we can set up for that screen right there. So that's available to use anytime.
We've talked anecdotally about the office needs. I think from your office end, sort of the guidance and management side as well as teachers. And I wonder, could it be fruitful for you to say, in our ideal world, our guidance and principal side of things would have X amount of rooms that we don't have right now? Is that
I
hard?
don't know if I can have that for March 19th, but that is certainly something that we could. I mean, I think one of the things that I mentioned in here was as a,
Need's been,
Our next interim.
it's clearly
Yeah,
been
I think-
stated, but
Well,
what
the next meeting, the April meeting.
Yeah, the need has clearly been stated. It'd be nice to know,
How many are we talking about?
Yeah, what would work, what's workable and helpful to really make it work the way you want it to work.
Yep. So that's future. Okay. Anything else?
I suppose for extra
Move
credit, do the
to
same
adjourn.
thing for the teachers, but
Second.
I won't ask for it.
All those in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are done for the evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have this if you want.
No, I've got it.
Okay.
You gave me one.